In this episode, we will be considering forms of artistic research and creative investigation. Following that, we will discuss the viability of publications as a format to present artistic research and key considerations when making such a publication. In the last part of this episode, we will be speaking to Gideon Kong and Jamie Yeo, who run Gideon Jamie, a two-person studio, and Temporary Press, an independent press. The key learning points for this episode are: how do we define artistic research and creative investigation? How viable are publications as a format for research? What are the considerations for presenting research through a publication? In the practice of art, there are many different approaches to making work. This episode introduces research-based and research-driven art approaches and how they can be captured well through a publication format. A research-based approach to art refers to a methodological pursuit for new knowledge in specific subject matters. Research-based art practices utilize processes and methods common to research or academia, such as data collecting, data analysis, or literature review to reflect on issues with artistic concerns. While research is undertaken by all artists in the process of developing their artwork, artistic research refers to research processes undertaken in and through art practice. In that way, artistic research bridges the fields of academia and art and is a crucial form of knowledge production. Considering the thoroughness of such an approach to or about art, research-based artists or creatives may lean towards books as an ideal format to consolidate and present their findings. This output may be dense and layered, featuring multiple footnotes or citations. In that way, we can see how the book form is one of the more suitable spaces to present and receive a body of knowledge. Before getting there, let's break down what we mean by artistic research. How can research be considered artistic? By the term research, we are describing the systematic and creative process of pursuing and creating points to access knowledge. In the general realm of art making, the need to research is not an alien procedure to artists. Artists have to undertake careful consideration of the materials they use, as well as their composition in space and the logistics of its installation and build. However, artistic research is a more specific way of pursuing a line of inquiry or study. It encompasses the search and production of knowledge that is configured and informed by art. The art practice is central to artistic research. It constitutes the motivation, content, and methodology, guiding new insights and understandings. Artistic research is not meant to give answers about art, or to provide a conclusive way of reading or interpreting art. Rather, it leans towards a continuous mode of exploration and learning. Simply put, artistic research is a form of thinking in, through, and with art. Two models of artistic research. While art practices, and hence artistic research, can be extremely diverse, artistic research tends to fall into two basic modes: research through art and art through research. In research about, for, or through art, insight and knowledge is garnered through reflecting, investigating, and closely studying art practices. Art becomes the pathway that nurtures new insights and knowledge. Such forms of research may also be cross-disciplinary and extend into the fields of art history, literature, gender, or media studies. These may also be circulated within academic circles or settings, subject to peer review or editorial refereeing to qualify the research findings and texts for publication. In art about, for, and through research, art practice orbits around research, and art practice is a form of research in itself. Not only is art the pathway towards new findings, these new findings are also regarded as art. In both models, as evident with how similar they sound, the relationship between research and art, and the emphasis on art or research, is what sets them apart. The first mode specifies research that examines and reflects on art practices, while the latter mode refers to a form of artistic practice developed through research processes. As you conceive your own art book, it is useful to establish your artistic approach in order to develop methods and strategies for its design. Now that we have clarified what is artistic about artistic research, we can spend some time next trying to map out what research entails. Research can be defined as the creative and systematic activity taken to gain, discover, and apply knowledge. Rather than seeking a clear and definitive conclusion or answer, research can be characterized by the continuous pursuit of knowledge that may be evolving and responsive. It can be speculative and expressive, postulating new ideas and knowledge that may be added onto or refined over time. You might have already realized that the speculative nature of research complements and even mirrors the speculative nature of art practice itself. Sometimes in artistic research, the introduction of an academic or critical framework is crucial in the development of the research. To break it down, we can also consider the key processes behind research and how these processes can lend themselves to artistic influence. Impetus and process of research can refer to the conception, motivation, inspiration, and reflection, or the formulation of research questions. Methods of research can refer to searching, archiving, collecting, interpreting, explaining, modeling, and experimenting. Presentation of research can refer to focusing on how the research is organized, distributed, and consumed by an audience. Now that we've clarified what we mean by artistic research, we want to spend some time talking about how best to approach it. We can summarize this into 4 key dimensions and questions. Subject: what am I researching? Method: how am I researching? Context: what is the subject related to? Outcome: what do I hope to achieve? To better determine how you will approach your artistic research publication, it would be good to first consider: which category does your project fall into? Is it research through art or art through research? What are the key takeaways of your research endeavor? Artistic research, while having close ties to academia, is not restricted to academic text. It can be broad-ranging to encompass more creative outputs. As explained earlier, artistic research is defined by its orientation towards art practices and its attention to art. Remember that there's no one correct model or way of approaching artistic research methodology. You can formulate one that suits your practice and your work. Editorial components for artistic research. Last but not least, with so many elements and possibilities to play with for text and visuals, paying attention to how these are translated on the page will help you decide what kind of experience you want to craft for your readers. Let's go through some key components. Wayfinding text. Readers of books may not always read from cover to cover. Because of that, wayfinding is a useful element to add in a book. Some common examples of these elements are page numbers, chapter, or book titles added in corners of every page. Each of these are useful for readers to wayfind what chapter or part they are on at any one time. Footnotes and endnotes. Footnotes can be applied if they contain useful information for the reader to read while consuming the main text. They can also be considered in more creative manners. Endnotes can be applied if they mainly contain references. Titles and subtitles. These serve as wayfinding for the reader and help to separate key sections in your body text. They should have a clear demarcation from the body text. Body text. Body text refers to the bulk of your artistic research, and it is the primary component of your book. You can think about the legibility, which is usually affected by font size, and leading, which refers to the vertical space between lines of text. If you are printing a book, it would be good to test print key spreads to get a feel of the actual print size and reading experience. Placement of images. The visuals also play an important role in artistic research. Apart from text, it is also important to consider the relationship between images and text. You can take a look at your materials and consider if the images explain or evidence parts of what is elaborated in the text, or the text explains the images. This will also help you decide the scale and placement of the images in relation to the text. The image captions are also generally less prominent than the body text and standardized across the book. Quotations. If you wish to include a quote, there are a variety of ways to make it stand out from the body text. You can consider an indentation, a change of font, or maybe even a change of color. Multiple sections. Within an extensive research project, there may be multiple sections. It would be good to create pacer pages to demarcate a transition between sections. Alternatively, the lack of pacer pages can also be another possibility to introduce, especially when attempting to create a book that is more amorphous and fluid with its organization. Appendix. The appendix would typically include a glossary, bibliography, and index. This usually goes last in the publication and is a dense document that captures everything referred to in the book. Something you may want to keep in mind is the differentiation of keywords and organization details, such as chapter titles or page numbers. These should be distinctly spotted at first glance to direct readers to what they may be curious about. While there are many things to consider in planning your publication, the most important thing is to remember enjoying the process and letting your artistic research take the lead. We will now be moving on to the conversation segment of this episode with Gideon Kong and Jamie Yeo, who are part of Gideon Jamie, a two-person studio involved in design, research, and learning as interdependent modes of practice, as well as Temporary Press, an independent press producing and publishing content surrounding a broad definition of research in art and design practices in collaboration with a small community of practitioners, educators, and researchers. In the conversation, They will be sharing more about the processes and considerations behind what they do with Temporary Press and their views on creative and artistic research publications.
Hi everybody, welcome to the conversation component to Art Books, A Beginner's Guide. This episode we are focusing on art books as artistic research and practice. Here with me today is Gideon and Jamie. They are designers and publishers of art books. I will, jump straight to the first question about what you guys do. So do share with us about what Gideon and Jamie is about, and perhaps also a bit about Temporary Press.
Yeah, so Temporary Press is a small-scale publishing press that we started around 2017, and that is part of the studio, one of the studio's activity under Gideon and Jamie. The studio is generally flexible and rather informal, our practice if I were to describe. And of course we take in commission design projects, but that forms maybe about less than half of the studio's activity and Temporary Press is one of those other half. Yeah, and yes, that's for the press. Yeah.
Actually, what is your research practices about, and how does that actually inform your practice as Gideon and Jamie?
Yeah.
Should I say first? So, personally, I'm interested in making stuff. So I mean that's where I graduated from. So that, but then also Gideon also shares the same interest of making things with found objects or making makeshift furniture. I mean, we do this as a studio together.
Yeah, and of course, individually for me, I'm interested in looking at graphic design practices that are slightly alternative in nature. So a little bit of critical or artistic aspects of graphic design practice. I'm interested to think about them as a subject matter, and of course we enjoy reading and making books, and that is why we are also designing and publishing them. So for us, we see ourselves as designers making books right? There's that category. You have artists making books, but we are designer making books. But if I were to be more specific, because we think of processes, we think of text also as material that we can shape. So in that sense, we are designing also processes, designing text, designing production, who are making books
And that's why also like art books or books is a format that you also like, right? Like as a kind of format, like why you're also gravitating quite largely to it. Right.
Yeah, books, they somehow are able to embody both form and idea. They're flexible, versatile enough as objects, as design objects also.
So today you have published to around 11 art books, and there's quite a lot of publications in the span of
about 2
years.
Yeah, this is the 3rd year.
So collaboration is something that occurs quite a lot in your practice. So maybe share a little bit about like why this is a focus of yours.
First we have to clarify that the 11 books are really simple books. They're straightforward ones, and that was our approach in the beginning, to look for contents that were sort of existing, but we were also very interested in, and they were not yet published. So then that shortened the process by a lot. Regarding collaboration, there's only 2 of us in the studio and the press, and we have a broad range of interests, but oftentimes we do not have enough time to pursue them, and we realized that publishing is quite liberating in that sense, because we are able to collaborate with people whom we find their work to be of interest, and of course there are overlaps also in terms of interest, and that is a very for us fruitful way to pursue these interests alongside others, and also hopefully be able to contribute in some way to this community of practitioners putting out books.
So how does some of these collaborations start? So maybe specifically artists such as Xavier Enting?
This is quite a different one from the rest of the publications we have, because he is not Singaporean. Most of what we work on are with practitioners based locally. And but he had an exhibition here.
At MS.
Yeah. I think 2018. Yeah, some time ago, and this book's published 2019. And I had been very interested in his work since when I was a student. So he had these various experiments of hacking printers. Some of them don't work, he mentioned. But for me, it's just very interesting how, as a graphic designer, studying graphic design, he didn't work with visual outcomes, but he worked with processes and ideas. To put it simply, and that was what I was interested in. And in this exhibition, he was making, he hacked large format inkjet printers.
Right.
And he made them print things a certain way. The nozzle is a distance away from the print, and so when it prints, it creates this distorted image, and so on. I won't go into details, but that exhibition was what he did over here, and I approached him as someone who is interested in his work, and later on we had a conversation, and after knowing more about him and his work through the conversation, I just asked him if he would like to publish something together. And he was open, to my surprise, and I was quite excited. And this came about after that.
But the reason also is because he was flying back to France, and then this exhibition is an ongoing. Whenever for this portion of the exhibition, whenever the sculpture earns enough Bitcoin, it buys a new bouquet of flowers. So then he will not be there to kind of document this change always. Yeah, this installation. So I think this also it benefits him in a certain way.
Yeah, so this was just one small part of the exhibition that he wanted to also document. Once he suggested the idea, what I did is just to go back to the exhibition space quite irregularly, just to photograph the bouquet of flowers, because they were decaying and they were being replaced once there was enough Bitcoin generated. And so we just simply documented that process in this publication. And if you notice, there are 4 bouquets over here. And this is just a simple idea, but what contextualized the work is the conversation that we had through writing at the back of the book. And through this simple process of documentation, we're able to reflect on, even through the book design, we're able to reflect on other themes around his work, and again also how his practice or his interest might overlap with the press or ours. Yeah, so I think that was quite a valuable aspect of this book.
And in terms of this overlap of interest, maybe to kind of frame it a little bit more, it brings me to my next question, which is about the idea of research being something where it's very knowledge creating. It encompasses, I guess, from looking a bit about your bio and some of the past interviews you've made, talking about unlearning, talking about unpacking certain set ideas about things. And I think it's very tangible when I'm looking at the books, and even the processes itself reflects some of the content that you are doing, and how it's very, very almost a whole package, from design to the way you publish to the content you all do. It appears that your work does challenge a lot of the norms, actually, foregrounding ideas of experimentation. So maybe just share a bit about these, maybe in some of the projects that you have, such as the postcards project, in collaboration with another collective that has, I guess, some affinity as well, HOKO, Atelier HOKO, Clara and Alvin. Just a bit about your approach, and then maybe specifically in that project.
So you mentioned that most of the time research is being seen as something that is about creating knowledge, but sometimes it can also be about unlearning and challenging or questioning certain dominant definitions about knowledge creation. Yeah, so I agree. I think that is true. So this is a book we did with Atelier HOKO, Alvin and Clara, and it's again quite another straightforward project where they already had this project, this project where they sent out postcards with instructions to perform, in people's own homes to to learn about basically windows, doors, and pipes. And these were the objects they were looking in 3 of their magazine issues. They have this publication series called Science of the Secondary. And so these were 3 of them. And for them, this was the process they used to arrive at some of the insights in those 3 books. And for us, we were really, again, quite interested in the process they used to learn about these 3 things. And of course, some of the instructions were quite funny and maybe they don't make sense. But we find, so they were quite funny and they didn't make sense. And we thought these questions sort of challenge, again, the idea of research. Do we do research by reading, analyzing, or can we do it through performing certain things, experiencing something that we might not have thought about before? And for us, that is also equally valuable. And perhaps that, again, aligns or overlaps with the idea of unlearning about what design is, what the process of design might be. And it might be it might be a stretch to call this research, but I would want to call it that. Yeah, just a different way of looking at searching and researching. Yeah.
So, Temporary Press and Gideon and Jamie is made up of both of you. Just want to know, curious, like how the collaboration is like. Do you all like take up different roles and how do you all work together?
Okay. For Gideon and Jamie, it's quite obvious, I guess, because I didn't have a background in graphic design. So if we have any graphic design jobs or books or what, normally he'll be the one doing the design and the layout and all that. But for me, how I come in is as probably when we are conceptualizing the book, or so it's more like someone to just bounce off ideas with lah. But for Temporary Press, it's a bit different. So I would say when we want to make a book, then Gideon will be the one who goes and like talk to the person and kind of ask whether they want to do something, and then we will talk about it, and maybe it's similar to what we do at Gideon. We will conceptualize together about the book, but then I will be the one doing more of the production, managing the stuff, managing like buying paper, counting how much we need, all those things, and also doing the printing and troubleshooting the machine, all those bit more on the production side. Whereas Gideon will be doing more of the design layout. I mean, it's not. I don't think it is exclusive. Meaning that when he's doing design, I will come in and like, maybe we can do it this way or what. But then when I'm doing the production, he will come in and like, okay, maybe we should simplify it, do it in a certain way. Yeah. Yes.
So maybe bringing in a specific example. So maybe we can talk about process in that way. The Sea is All Highway by Kenneth Tay. How was the collaboration like between both of you? Because this is under Temporary Press, and what did y'all do? How did that work out? And then how does the collaboration also extend to an additional person being involved in the creation of the book?
So it's interesting because when we first started, he did the lecture at LaSalle, and it was a very he condensed it into a very short version. This was after he completed the thesis, and of course it's much thicker, and it's the full thesis with several chapters, and we couldn't decide on which to publish at the point of time. And later on, the idea just came, okay, why not do both? 2 versions? They are right. The same contents.
Right. Okay.
But we thought it might be an interesting idea to cater to a wider readership, and people can choose how much they want to commit to the research. If they want to commit more, they want to read in more detail, they can look at the full thesis. If they just want to get a quick idea of what it is about, they can just pick this up. And for the edited lecture, because it's quite short, Kenneth was quite nice to ask us to contribute by having a conversation with him, and that was included in the book at the end. And he was also quite generous to have asked us, I think, some questions about the press. Even though it might be slightly outside of his research. So collaboration is it happened for this. It happened this way, and of course, then we looked at the materials that he referenced throughout the research and took some references for the design of the book. And in the conversation, we also talk a little bit about the design of the book and how that affects further interpreting the contents. And for us, that's also quite a nice thing to include.
The differentiation of design research and artistic research. What are the differences actually?
Okay.
And are there different approaches that you would take, like maybe in consideration to maybe a design researcher and writer, Justin? So fundamentally, what's the difference first?
Okay, there are a few questions, so I'll answer them one by one. The first one is whether this is, in what way this might be considered artistic or design research. I mean, it is. I don't think it is, but and I don't think Kenneth would say it is. But what we found interesting that relates to the idea of research in art and design is how he used visual materials, quite a lot of them, how he interpret them throughout the thesis. And he paid close attention to visual or design objects, even the 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝗵𝗃 logo. I think one of it was that, which for us was quite unexpected for a research that is outside of design, outside the field of design, to have such sensibilities or sensitivity to design objects, not so much only visual objects. And so in the book, I described it as this way of looking as a way of thinking about understanding or even imagining information that requires additional layers of non-textual interpretation, questioning, metaphorical thinking. So he looked at movie narratives, he looked at graphic design, artworks, certain archetypal objects. So his research took into account design objects as valid points of analysis and imagination. For us, that is quite a significant part of design research.
So like logo design in general is basically a symbol, and perhaps looking and using it to read actually is quite important, especially in the research that he's doing.
Yeah, and so I guess that's where it aligns in terms of an interest in research through art and design. And the other question you ask about art and artistic and design research.
Right.
To be honest, it is quite a complicated field, and of course we are not exactly entirely familiar with all the discourse that's surrounding it. But for us in general, what these forms of research is they basically refer to a way to understand and learn through artistic or design processes and activities. It is not to learn about art or design practices, but to learn through art and design practices. And so then there is an emphasis in practice and making sense of that practice. The second part is, of course, making sense of that practice. And that is a key component of research. You're making sense of what you're making. But there are specific ideas pertaining to each field. In design research, I guess academically or in institutions or in organizations that talk about design research, it's very much, I think, still a scientific activity. So it's quite different from discourse in artistic research. But for us, maybe we don't think so much about the difference between them, also because the nature of our work, although it's design, but sometimes it's also not really considered design, and we want to explore artistic processes in design, which probably wouldn't be considered as art also. And so that distinction is not helpful for us in this sense. And we don't consciously distinguish between the two, although we try to be familiar with the discourse around both areas.
So maybe this helps us to dovetail into design researcher and writer Justin's project that you're collaborated on. So maybe let's bring up that book and let's maybe talk a little bit about how this focus on a bit of design history of Singapore, and also a bit on archive and what an archive serves and how it can actually be translated into the book form. Yeah, maybe share with us how this project came about. Yeah.
So just very quickly, we know Justin for a while, and he has always been quite generous to share whatever he knows and the materials that he have, not just to us but also to the public. So he runs this archive that collects visual materials, graphic design materials from Singapore in the past or recent past, and we just had an interest in what he's doing, and we find it valuable as an archive, and we wanted to make sense of it in some way, in a very small way, and this was the outcome. We approached him, asked him if we could put together a compilation of a selection in his archive, and it happens to be corporate logos between 1956 to 2003. And yeah, basically the outcome is straightforward. It is arranged chronologically, and it shows black and white versions of the logos, quite a large selection of them, and again it is accompanied with a conversational piece afterward at the end between the press and Justin. What we wanted to do with the conversation is really to find out in further detail what is his intention with the archives. It does not really touch on graphic design history, but what it does is to get to know in a deeper way his intentions, what the potential of the archive, and so on through the conversation. And it's interesting because although this could be considered some kind of research in design, but we later end up collaborating on a piece of artwork installation for a biennial, and that again occupies this blur between design and art. For something to be considered artistic or design research, there needs to be contextualization. There needs to be that effort to help, or not help, but just provide some kind of direction for understanding, interpreting the work. It doesn't need to be a specific one, but there should be a general direction. And depending on the work, some, like for example this one, it's really just a short paragraph at the end. We don't explain that much. Yeah, it's really just a short paragraph at the end. And for some of them, they come through conversations and interviews. So they're not all the same. It depends on each work, and we try to make it appropriate to the work.
I'd like to bring up temporary press, specifically to do with the method of printing, risography. So why did y'all think about printing using risography?
For the risograph, we wanted to make books in the beginning. Not so much publish, but really just to make books. But of course, if we were making books on our own, it makes sense to publish them and sell them. And doing that is quite expensive, especially here, because printing, material, everything is generally more costly. And we thought it'd be nice to have a production method that we can control. And of course, with the risograph, we're able to do that just very quickly. We don't have to worry so much about printing costs because the labor is us. It's just the material, which we need to spend a bit on every time we publish. But if not, in general, we have quite a bit of control over the processes. But of course, with the risograph, there are a lot more limitations that we have to work around, which we find it both interesting as well as sometimes challenging. But generally, it has been quite fun to produce with the risograph. And our first machine was A4 size. So it's really quite limited. A4 size, just black ink. It was a new machine. We had to spend a bit of money just to get that. But after that, we were able to produce quite freely in that sense, within limitations.
Yeah.
Challenges?
For the black machine, it's quite straightforward. I think it's more on the expectations. Like because now we're so used to having desktop printers, we just print in color and then the picture just comes out. But for risograph, when we print it out, you have to choose certain settings Like when you print in grain, it will only come out in grain, and there's a certain quality that you have to accept from the risograph lah. So, I mean, that's like a limitation that we kind of have for ourselves lah when we are designing our publications.
It's also an intentional, like, so it's also a kind of a quality that y'all also embrace, right? That's why risography is a good solution for the books that y'all do.
I think it is a quality that we try to understand. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah lah. Not much difference between embrace and try to understand, but it's not something that we are deliberately going after. It is just a characteristic of the technology, the machine. But we try to understand how that affects the appearance of images, how that affects reception or reading, and we try to work that into the publication. Yeah, I won't say it's celebrating it. I don't think we are celebrating the textures and what, although we quite like it. But we try to understand how it works and how it works for certain publications. And of course, there's a limitation that sometimes maybe certain people would choose to avoid. Yeah, so it wouldn't work for some projects. And we are also exploring. We want to explore offset printing as well. Yeah, but of course, the budget for that would be higher.
So the starting point of, or rather the main reason why risography is something that you are looking at is quite to do with the production and its cost-effective quality of it.
Yeah.
Correct.
And it's simple to find out the characteristic of risograph printing, how it is cost-effective for what number of books.
What's the number of books for risograph that is cost-effective as compared to, say, offset printing?
Offset printing, it depends also. I think it depends on country and printing cost. But over here, we find that if you have only 200 books, sometimes per book cost is quite expensive. Until we hit maybe 500, then it gets better, significantly better. For risograph, because we have the machine, so we can choose to print however many copies we want lah.
Right.
And it's not so bad, but we try to always keep to 100 to 200.
Right.
For now.
Where do you derive this number 100 and 200 quantities? Based on your, I guess, distribution circuit, if there is one?
Okay. In the beginning, we don't have.
Okay.
Yeah, so we just thought maybe it is nice to produce 150. I think we started with 150. For us, that is also a manageable amount because printing sometimes is quite a intensive, quite laborious process.
And we started in a very small space lah.
Yeah, I think maybe back to the question on like challenges of the risograph machine.
Maybe we talk about the coloured ones.
Yeah.
Okay. Then maybe we can actually
See the cover?
So when printing this, there was it was this is the first book that we printed in colour.
Oh yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it was quite colour intensive. And then as you can see the
layers of
and I think we did not manage to kind of control the pressure from the machine. So I mean what you see here is all cleaned up.
Right.
That means when we printed it, there was like a lot of roller marks and all the ink is kind of at the edges now. So to compensate for that, we had to erase them like page by page. Like subsequent, I think after when we were printing the Xavier and Teen's book, it got a bit better. Like we understood, okay, maybe you have to change certain pressures on the machine, and so we had to work with what the machine can do. And the fact that the machine is slightly older, and we had to run the paper. We had to work with it lah. We had to learn.
Thanks for sharing, Jimmy and Gideon. All the books that you have showed us today, and for answering all the questions. Hopefully it's very helpful for the viewers who are watching this, who are planning to do their own research books. Maybe just one last question. A few tips maybe that you could give to any first-time people who want to come up with their first publications. and I guess yes, first time art book makers, what are some tips and advice you would like to give them?
One thing is, of course, there is no need for a lot of fancy finishing or options, and oftentimes working with something quite limited might be would be good lah, because you have less things to worry about. And the books that we did, like for example this one with 𝗕𝗲𝗴𝗶, it's really a simple paperback and perfect bind, straightforward typesetting, black and white, and of course with the orange paper, orange cover, and something like this we are still quite happy with. In fact, this book I think did the best in terms of sales lah. Yeah, and this was the first book, and we're quite happy with something as I guess you could call down to earth as this, and putting more attention into contents and the quality of the publication is something that we will encourage people to do. Yeah.
So in a measured way, to talk about as a tip, you know, for first time public people who publish their own books, I guess the approach to the print to keep it very cost efficient is something strategic to perhaps think about, but not exclusively in relation to the content that you're working with. Some may need a little bit more color or effects because of the context of the content.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And working with, I mean, if there is the opportunity, working with designers who are familiar with type and print, I think it's quite a good thing to have, yeah, for a first book lah.
Right.
Yeah, even if it's just asking for advice and not necessarily getting a designer to do it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Is there any other tips that you would like to raise?
I think there is also the part about how do you keep up, right, with publishing after doing it for a while. In fact, it's quite tiring for us in the beginning when we had to rush for a deadline and put out 5 books together. It's quite tiring.
And the deadline is usually the book fair?
For us, yes,
mostly?
for the first 2 years. Yeah, so there is that part about maintaining the rhythm of publishing. Of course, the community is one thing. There are friends whose practice you are interested in, and that, for us, that provides us a lot of possibilities, a lot of different ideas. And I would say another thing is for me is to really just to continue reading and be interested in books. Because how can I publish if I'm not interested in contents and books? And it's a simple answer, but sometimes maybe it's not always the case. Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks, Gideon and Jamie, for coming by and sharing your things.
Yeah.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you for watching this episode of Art Books, A Beginner's Guide. If you've enjoyed this series, we would also appreciate it if you can fill in a feedback form that can be accessed through the QR code or link. We have also compiled a list of titles or texts that have been referenced or consulted on in the episode for your reading pleasure. See you next time.